Now I have the huge pleasure to invite Jeff Pulvert on stage. Jeff has been a pioneer in trying to have us understand that communication is the key thing. He's been a pioneer, an entrepreneur in developing technologies that help us communicate best. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you.
Jeff just had the kids talking, and we would love to listen. When you were a kid, how did technology change your life?
So when I was a kid, when I was in school, I had a couple of challenges. One of them is I didn't have too many friends. I was quite lonely, and I had trouble connecting with a lot of folks, perhaps because I saw through these kids. And so for me, ultimately, it was my uncle who had a hobby of amateur radio. And I discovered through technology, through radio, I was able to connect with many people. And there was this one moment in my life where I was about 9 years old. And my uncle comes to my parents' house and takes me to his office. And my father had told me I should call my uncle, I should learn about this. And I never did, because as a kid, who does, right? And after an hour of going to this office, he takes me for a tour around everyone. I meet these people. And it was sitting in a room not much bigger than the size of our circle here. And and there's a desk, and there's a box on the desk, and he flips a switch, and I start to hear noise, and this box starts to glow. And what I didn't appreciate, that was a radio. And he speaks in a very cryptic language, and he tunes a dial, and all I hear noise, he hears voices. And he sits there very closely, and he says, CQ, CQ, this is K2 QQM calling CQ. And he repeats this for about a minute, and lets go with the microphone. And I was in awe, because for about an hour, there were people in a queue from all over the world who wanted to talk to my uncle. And they said his name was Fred, he was in Farmingdale, New York, and he gave a signal report. And I never knew my uncle was so popular, I had no idea that he was so interesting. And people from all over the world spoke English. And what I realized after sitting at this desk for an hour, that my uncle had the cure for loneliness. And that if I could take this radio and put it in my bedroom, then I could have friends before school and after school. It didn't matter about what was happening at school. But the challenge was, and I thought I was such a good nephew, at the end I asked my uncle, could I take this home? He said, no. But no. And then I learned that in order to qualify to use this radio, I had to study physics. I had to teach myself Morse code. I had to teach myself the rules and regulations to be a radio operator. So I learned at 9 years old I could be obsessive. And so I learned about failure and about learning and doing. And so by the time I turned 12 and a half, I had a license to communicate with the world. And I used to spend somewhere between 40 to 60 hours a week on the radio, exploring and discovering people where everyone was connecting on a first-name basis. I was not very interesting, though, because when I was 13 years old on this radio, most people on the radio were 50 and 60-year-old men. And they would talk about work, and they would complain about or talk about their families. And of course, I didn't have a girlfriend, and I didn't have a job. And so I learned to listen, to connect, to share and engage, and to let people share their stories. And that opened up my world and ultimately saved my life, because it was my passion for radio that first connected me to Israel. Besides being Jewish and going to Salman Schechter, one of my very first friends on the radio was a guy named Danny, who lived in Ramat Aviv. And back in the 70s, a friend of mine was coming to Israel, and I asked Danny, could he meet him? And he said, sure, any friend of yours is a friend of mine, look me up. And we didn't have the internet back then, but I got postcards. And the first postcard I got was that Danny was either very patriotic or something was up, because there were lots of photographs of Golda Meir, and he had to go through security to go into his apartment. And at the end of the summer, I got a one-sentence postcard, check out how Danny spells his name. And on ham radio, we're just first names. I'm Jeff, that's Danny. And I saw his name, he always said his name was Danny Mayer. Turns out that Danny was one of Golda Meir's grandchildren.
I can't believe this.
and she was living with him.
Wow.
At 8 Baronhurst Street in Ramat Aviv. And that's where his ham radio station was set up. And he's been a life friend of mine. And he's now, last time I saw, he was a librarian at Teachers College. But he's been a friend for a long time. And for me, radio has been liberating. Ultimately, it was my passion to communicate and my obsession with connecting radio with telephones and doing phone patches, because back in the 70s, it cost a lot of money to make a phone call from Tel Aviv to New York. So Danny would make it a point whenever he could to get one of his friends in New York to call me to say, get on the radio. And he used me to patch his friends onto the radio for him, and so we bypassed long-distance phone calls by using radio. And when the internet was happening back in '95, I had this crazy idea, why can't we do the same thing with the internet? So in 1995, by accident, truly by passion, I created the first phone network that ran on the internet called Free World Dial-Up. It was free, it connected the world, and it ran on the dial-up internet, and it changed everything. I had no idea that 6 months later I'd be fighting 300 phone companies from America who were wanting to shut everything down, that I very accidentally disrupted things. And I had an education, but not that kind of education. And ultimately, that led me down a path. It saved my life. Because my passion is to communicate with the internet. I lost my day job on Wall Street. But as life would have it, the company I worked for was in the World Trade Center. And 3.5 years later, they lost 700 people in 9/11. And when I got fired, I decided I wasn't going to go back and work on Wall Street. I was going to pursue a passion of communications. Wow. And it was through living my passion, and a lot of my knowledge is self-taught, that I believe that I learned that it's what I do. I just follow a dream, and I ultimately help change the way things are. And today, if there's anyone in the audience that looks at their phone when they're not in here, and they click on someone's face, and they maybe have a video chat on FaceTime, or perhaps they're having voice communication, and they don't think about where they're talking from or talking to, and it's for free, you're welcome. Because in 2003, I had a vision, and I went to the government, and I wanted to ask them, could we be proactive? Is it possible for clarity that voice communication and by default video that starts on the internet should not be regulated the way it used to be? And after a year, they said, yeah. And so the US government issued something called a Pulver Order, which was issued in February 2004, and it's honored in over 100 countries around the world. And that law, combined with the evolution of smartphones, has helped shape communications.
So thank you so much for that. As Jeff just said, Jeff did amazing things in communication technology, but I wanted to start about him telling his personal life, because one thing that bothers me tremendously is that when education technology starts making solutions for kids, people always say, let's make something cool, let's put gamification, let's put... And I think it really does not get the value of the digital world, of internet. I mean, now you just gave so many examples of the richness of this world. You just mentioned why kids are engaged. and I think we have to listen to that. You just said it changed your life. You are able to communicate with other people that have interests like you. You are able to reach out, you are able to find things. So we have to understand that the engagement of kids, which are learners, go beyond this thing of being cool. So with the few minutes we have left, can you please send a message? All these people here are people that are going to go out of here and carry on developing and determining how education should be. Could you send a message how you think...
I would make an argument for the misfits, for the people who are different, who don't necessarily fit into the mold of what you think we are. But we're okay, we could turn out okay, but we have to be believed in that there should be someone in our lives that allows us to be creative and to explore the inner us, to be part of the outer you. And technology is part of it, but don't forget about the humanity. Don't forget about the hugs, don't forget about the love, don't forget about the caring, because we're not machines, and we need to be hugged and cared for. And we need to be appreciated and to be encouraged to explore. You know, one of my passions back as a kid is I used to build rockets. I used to go up. I wasn't filing with Homeland Security. I actually was building little SD's rockets, and sometimes they would explode, and sometimes they wouldn't. I played with chemistry, not to do bad things. I took things apart. And I don't think we have a chance for our kids to blow things up in a polite way as much as we used to, and to explore the outer edges of our own creativity, and to learn that just because we don't fit in doesn't mean we were bad, that maybe we see things that no one else sees, and to give us the chance to become who we are, because we're different and we're evolving. And so don't cast us aside, because we matter too.
Jeff, thank you so much.